Continuing our reading in Hellbent for Election by Phyllis Speshock. This episode is Chapter 9. We came presently to the red brick schoolhouse, and Alexis stopped to look at it. "Is this where you attended, Hellbent?" "Yes, though I was not much of a student." "Oh? I thought you were a rather good student." "As far as marks were concerned, yes, but I was really not much interested. There was no one to impress save Della, who loved me as I am. And I had come to resent rules in any form." "Did you know what the guidebook says of obedience to magistrates?" "Oh, yes. I only said I resented rules, not that I broke them." "You mean at this time? For I believe we have established that you did break a few." All right, I said sourly. "You don't have to rub it in. I mean, at this time. Also, I had rules made by society in mind, and keeping to those is at least more than I can say for my cousins who broke the laws that were man-made, religious-made, and those extracted from the guidebook, both written and implied." "Dear, dear," he said. "But then, since we have come down here so that you could plead your case, let's be on with it. What sort of shenanigans did they pull?" "All the obvious ones. The ones you would expect non-believers to pull. They skipped school, cheated on exams, lied, gossiped, bullied, listened to and used foul language, cheated in games, sports, fought, argued, molested." "I say, Hellbent," Alexis interrupted, "this is rather petty stuff." "Not so petty, Alexis, when you claim to be a member of an organization of example setters. You must admit that any organization which, on the one hand, imposes such a mountain of rules and regulations as to make membership nearly unbearable, and then, on the other hand, runs about wildly evangelizing and encouraging proselytes, is of itself bewildering enough, without the added complexity of breaking not only its own, but everyone else's laws." Alexis sighed. "I see what you mean," he said. "But then we were talking about young people." "Young people, indeed," I snorted. "Have you ever seen a bad habit get better with age? Great oaks from little acorns, remember? But I'll get to the adults later. To go on with the young people, one of the cruelest and most effective of their deadly weapons was that of snobbery. They formed little cliques which, for one reason or another, excluded all other young people. Their bases for these cliques were generally ridiculous. With boys, for instance, a clique might be composed of those who were related by blood or marriage, those who sang well together, those who played instruments well together, those of approximately the same height, those who had scored the winning points in a game, those who had shared in some tidbit of mischief, and so on ad nauseum. With the girls, the cloisters were founded even more absurdly. The color of one's hair might be the determining factor, or the style, or the similarity of apparel, or size, or lack of beauty or intelligence, or overabundance of either or both, and this and that ad nauseum. Thus, if any other young person who differed ever so slightly sought entry into the clique, he was ignored utterly, at the least. Or if he or she insisted upon entry by being so bold as to sit down next to you and smile, then the only thing left to do was to get up and move away. The mentally retarded and the poverty-stricken might as well stay home to begin with. As for those whose mannerisms and appearance varied a shade, were let out, then how could the extreme case hope for approval? And all this, mind you, from believers whose founder said, "All ye brethren," and who ministered to the poor, the lonely, the unwanted, the diseased, the blind, the crippled, and the demon-possessed. "Yes," Alexis said sadly, "to get right down to the bare facts, he was even buried in a borrowed grave. But then, you must not forget, Hellbent, that the very fact that they are believers makes them pray for the enemy. Satan, the blighter, doesn't have to molest his own. He seeks to corrupt those who are not his own. Much of this behavior sounds as if he had a hand in it." Much of it also looked, I grunted, as if they gave him complete control willingly. I recall the incident of the tractor driving, for example. Tractor driving? One of those farm vehicles? Exactly. Some of my cousins were farmers, you see, and according to a state law, were not then permitted to procure a license to drive an automobile until they attained the age of 16. However, no license was required to operate farm machinery. Their fathers, therefore, who were pillars of the church, allowed them from time to time, when they were able, by stretching to reach the various apparatuses, to drive the tractors not only all over the countryside, but through the village streets at a breakneck speed. Now, I think you will agree, Alexis, that despite the fact a civil law was broken, surely a moral law was greatly violated, and that he is surely the sole implanter of the moral law into our minds. One cannot heedlessly endanger others without breaking the moral law. Alexis shook his head. But I would have thought the state would correct its laws. Oh, the police spoke to the fathers now and again and asked them to discipline the youngsters, but why foist personal responsibility off on the state? Besides, this is just one small example of sidestepping civil law. I seem to recall many believers in the early churches, though I ran across a few in the organizations I visited in my lifetime, because it would have been unwelcome, I'm sure, were brought forth from the ranks of the criminal, immoral, and dishonorable. I also seem to recall that they did not remain in those conditions long. In fact, the whole gist of the conversation, as far as I can see, was that ye have put off the old man with his deeds and have put on the new man. I saw no such change nor anything closely resembling it. I can see how you would be disillusioned, Hellbent, Alexis said, starting to walk down the maple-lined street, carefully avoiding the cracks in the sidewalk. However, the believer does have two foes to combat, his fleshly nature and his spiritual nature. By spiritual nature, I refer to that inner self which delights in sins of the spirit, feeling superior, embarrassing others, gossiping, shifting blame to the innocent. This is the foe with which the devil, may he dwell in a crematory, likes most to tamper with these, because these sins are worse than, or often trigger, those of the flesh. After all, he is the prince of this world, and believers are dwelling in territory occupied by him. It's no use your defending them and making excuses for them, Alexis, I said, watching his footwork. If they really wanted to change, they would be given the strength, right? They would be given the strength to stop throwing in with Satan and making his work easier. The guidebook says so. There, you missed one. You've stepped on a crack. Alexis laughed and began to walk straight. So I have, he said. So I have. But then we're just nicely started. I'll have another go at it later. He seemed rather disgustingly amused. And that's the end of chapter 9.